"Grandma, my parents will take your money after the party," my 8-year-old granddaughter whispered into my ear. Her tiny breath tickled my skin, but her words sliced straight into my heart. I froze with my glass halfway to my lips. Around us, laughter and chatter filled the living room, the clinking of glasses and plates echoing the illusion of a happy family gathering. Yet in that moment, all I could hear was the fragile, trembling voice of a child caught in a secret far too heavy for her little shoulders. I forced a smile, patted her hand, and whispered back, "Thank you, sweetheart." Then I set my glass down, stood up, and adjusted the shawl over my shoulders. My son was laughing at a joke one of his friends had made. My daughter-in-law, resplendent in a red dress, was parading around the room like she owned it, soaking up compliments from the neighbors. Neither of them noticed when I quietly picked up my purse. I slipped out the side door, the chill evening air greeting me like an old friend. Behind me, the sound of the party carried on, oblivious. I walked down the path, each step firmer than the last. If they thought they could corner me, they were wrong, because what they didn't know was that I had already seen the signs the papers slid across the table for me to sign, the hushed phone calls, the way they avoided my eyes when money was mentioned. Tonight, my granddaughter's innocent whisper simply confirmed what I had long suspected. I left the party not in defeat, but with a plan forming in my mind. They believed I was weak, distracted, easy to fool. But what I did next would shake them to their very core. When I got home that night, the silence of my modest house wrapped around me like a heavy blanket. I sat in the old rocking chair by the window, the one my late husband had built with his own hands, and tried to steady my racing thoughts. My granddaughter's words echoed in my mind, colliding with fragments of every uneasy glance, every strained laugh, and every clipped word I had endured from my son and his wife in recent years. I remembered the first time I met my daughter-in-law, Melissa. She was radiant, confident, and determined to make an impression. My son, Daniel, was utterly smitten. He had just finished graduate school and landed a stable job. I thought Melissa would be a good match, ambitious, cheerful, and ready to build a life with him. In the beginning, she made an effort. She cooked me dinner once, asked me about old family recipes, even complimented my garden. But soon, the mask slipped. Melissa became possessive of Daniel's time and attention. Family gatherings turned into showcases for her, with Daniel echoing her opinions like a shadow. Whenever I voiced an idea, she countered it with a dismissive smile. "That's outdated, Mom," Daniel would add, parroting her tone. I told myself not to be sensitive. I wanted to believe she would soften with time. But instead, her control only grew sharper. The financial matters started small. Daniel asking me to co-sign a loan for a good investment, Melissa insisting on helping me organize my bank papers. I declined politely, but each refusal was met with a flicker of irritation. Soon after, I began noticing subtle changes. The way Daniel avoided eye contact when money was mentioned, Melissa's sudden enthusiasm for my house renovations, her probing questions about the insurance policy I had kept since my husband passed. And then there was the incident with the will. After my husband died, we had updated our estate plan. He had been meticulous, wanting to ensure that our assets would be safe for me and, eventually, for our grandchildren. One evening, Melissa dropped by unannounced. She brought over a casserole and suggested we look over some legal documents. I found myself staring at papers that didn't make sense, written in convoluted language I had not seen before. When I asked about them, Melissa waved her manicured hand casually. "Just standard procedure, Mom. Daniel and I can take care of these things for you." I refused to sign. Her smile tightened. That night, I retrieved our old files from the lockbox. My husband had always told me, "Never sign what you don't understand, and never let anyone rush you." I held onto those words as though they were lifelines. Still, I didn't want to believe Melissa could be plotting against me. I wanted to think she was simply careless, maybe overly ambitious. But my granddaughter's whisper left no room for doubt. If an 8-year-old had overheard her parents planning to take my money, then it was no longer suspicion, it was truth. I thought about my son. Daniel had always been gentle, almost too gentle. As a child, he cried easily when he lost a game, and he hated confrontation. He grew up into a man who avoided conflict at any cost. even if it meant surrendering his own voice. Melissa had filled that void with her dominance. Part of me wondered if he even realized the full extent of her schemes, or if he simply went along to keep the peace. As the night wore on, I replayed the evening in my mind. Melissa's confident strut around the party, Daniel's forced laughter, the way they both seemed more interested in appearances than family. It was all a performance, and I had been cast as the weak old woman in the background. They expected me to be grateful for an invitation, to sit quietly and smile while they celebrated their control, but they underestimated me. In the quiet of my living room, I realized I had two choices: pretend I hadn't heard my granddaughter's warning and let them carry on, or confront the storm head-on. My heart ached at the thought of cutting open the illusion of family, but my instincts screamed louder. Protect yourself. Protect what's yours. The next morning, I paid a visit to the bank. I spoke with the branch manager, a kind woman who had known me for years. She confirmed that several inquiries had been made recently about my accounts by someone claiming to have my authorization. My stomach tightened. Melissa again. She had tried to get access without me. Luckily, the bank had refused without my signature. That small refusal saved me, but it wouldn't last if they found another way. From the bank, I went to the office of Mr. Harris, an attorney who had handled my husband's estate years ago. He was surprised to see me but welcomed me in. I explained everything: Melissa's pressure, the documents she had brought, the overheard whisper. His brow furrowed deeply as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "You've done the right thing coming here," he said firmly. "This isn't uncommon. I've seen many families torn apart over money, but you still hold the power, and if you're careful, they can't touch a cent." We spent hours reviewing my files. Mr. Harris explained every clause of my husband's will, showing me exactly where I was protected. He also suggested preparing additional safeguards, just in case Melissa tried something bolder. As I listened, I felt the heaviness on my chest ease a little. For the first time in months, I had clarity. That evening, I returned home exhausted but resolute. I looked at the framed photograph of my husband on the mantel. His eyes seemed to watch me, steady and calm. I whispered, "I won't let them win. I'll guard what you left us." My granddaughter called me the next day. In her small voice, she asked, "Grandma, are you mad at me for telling you?" Tears stung my eyes. "No, sweetheart," I said gently. "You were very brave, and because you told me, everything will be okay." I didn't tell her what I was planning. She was too young to carry that weight. But I promised myself she would grow up in a family where she could see strength, not manipulation. The battle was only beginning. Melissa thought I was fragile, someone she could maneuver like a pawn. Daniel thought silence was safer than truth. But both of them were about to learn that silence, when held by the right person, could become the most powerful weapon of all. The days after the party stretched long, each one thick with unspoken tension. I didn't hear from Daniel or Melissa, which in itself was telling. Usually after a family gathering, Daniel would at least call to say thank you or check in. This time, nothing. Their silence wasn't accidental, it was calculated. They wanted me to stew in doubt, to feel isolated, so that when they approached me again, I might be more pliable. But I wasn't sitting idly. I began by digging through my old records. I pulled out file boxes from the hall closet and spread papers across my dining room table. Bank statements, insurance policies, deeds, all the documents my husband and I had carefully saved. I remembered how he used to joke that we were our own secretaries, never trusting anyone else to keep our affairs in order. At the time, I thought he was being overly cautious. Now, I silently thanked him for his foresight. As I reviewed the papers, memories flooded back: our first mortgage, the day we paid off the house, the life insurance policy we updated after Daniel was born. Each page told a story of responsibility and trust. But woven into those memories was a bitter realization. The same son we had worked so hard to protect was now complicit in trying to take it all away. One evening, I noticed a small envelope tucked into one of the folders. Inside was a handwritten note from my husband, written just months before he passed. His shaky script read, "If anything ever feels wrong, don't hesitate to stand your ground. You know more than they think you do, and you are stronger than you believe." My hands trembled as I read those words, tears sliding down my cheeks. That note felt like he had reached out from beyond to steady me. It was the push I needed. The next morning, Melissa appeared at my doorstep. She wore her usual flawless makeup, her hair styled immaculately. She greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Mom. Thought I'd drop by to check on you after the party." I invited her in, masking my unease with politeness. She sat at the kitchen table and launched into small talk how busy Daniel was, how my granddaughter was excelling at school. Then, almost casually, she pulled a thin folder from her purse. "I brought some forms," she said, sliding them toward me. "They're just standard updates for your accounts. It'll make things easier for everyone in the long run." I didn't touch the folder. Instead, I looked directly at her. "Melissa, I don't sign anything without reading it carefully, and I'd prefer to discuss such matters with Daniel present." Her smile faltered for just a moment before she recovered. "Of course. I just thought I'd save you the trouble." I pushed the folder back toward her. "Thank you, but no." And for her eyes hardened, though her lips remained curved. "You know, sometimes it's better to trust family than to burden yourself with all this paperwork." I met her gaze steadily. "And sometimes it's better to protect yourself than to regret blind trust." For a brief second, the mask dropped. I saw irritation flash across her face, sharp and cold. Then she stood abruptly, tucking the folder back into her purse. "Suit yourself," she said lightly. "I'll talk to Daniel." I met. After she left, my heart pounded with both fear and triumph. She had revealed her hand too openly, and now I was certain she would escalate her tactics. That evening, I called Mr. Harris again. "She came to my house," I told him. "She brought more documents." He sighed. "They're getting desperate, but that can work in your favor. Keep refusing to sign anything. In fact, I want you to start keeping a record, write down dates, times, what's said. If this ends up in court, details will matter." So I did. Every call, every visit, I wrote down in a notebook. I even noted the tone of voice, the expressions on their faces. It made me feel both vulnerable and powerful at once, like I was preparing for a storm but also holding an umbrella no one knew I had. A few days later, Daniel called. His voice was hesitant, as though he were rehearsing lines. "Mom, Melissa mentioned you're being a little difficult with the paperwork. We're only trying to help." "Andy." I closed my eyes, aching at the sound of my son aligning himself against me. "Daniel," I said gently, "I don't need help managing what your father and I built. I've done fine for years." He sighed. "You don't understand. We're under a lot of pressure. The house, the expenses, it would make sense if we streamlined things. It's not like you'll need all of it forever." His words stung, sharper than Melissa's practiced manipulation. Coming from my own son, they cut deep. "Daniel," I whispered, my voice trembling, "are you telling me my security is an inconvenience to you?" There was silence on the line. Finally, he muttered, "I just think Melissa knows what's best." I hung up soon after, tears burning my eyes. My own flesh and blood had chosen convenience over loyalty, but the pain quickly hardened into resolve. If Melissa was steering Daniel, then I had to be the anchor that held firm. That night, I placed my husband's note on the nightstand, letting it be the last thing I saw before I closed my eyes. I whispered into the dark, "I won't fail us." The pieces of a plan were forming, sharper each day. Melissa thought I was a frail old woman, easy to outmaneuver. Daniel thought silence kept him safe. They didn't realize that I, too, could wield silence not as weakness, but as a weapon. And soon, they would see just how dangerous a quiet grandmother could be. The following week, Melissa tried a different tactic. Instead of showing up with paperwork, she invited me to dinner at their house. The invitation was worded sweetly, almost too sweet. "We'd love to have you over, Mom. Just family time, nothing more." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me wanted to see just how far they were willing to go. When I arrived, the table was set as if for a holiday: candles, polished silverware, even a bouquet of fresh roses in the center. Melissa greeted me with a wide smile, ushering me inside. Daniel kissed my cheek, though his eyes didn't quite meet mine. My granddaughter ran into my arms, and for a moment, everything felt almost normal, but I couldn't shake the gnawing suspicion that this elaborate display was nothing but theater. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Melissa complimented the roast chicken she had made. Daniel chimed in about work, and my granddaughter chattered about school. Yet beneath the surface, there was a strange tension, like an actor waiting for their cue. And then it came. Between bites, Melissa said casually, "Mom, Daniel and I were talking about the future. You shouldn't have to worry about bills or bank visits anymore. We can take care of all that for you." Daniel cleared his throat. "Yeah, Mom. It's simpler if we handle the finances. You deserve to relax." I set my fork down slowly. Relaxing doesn't mean handing over everything I own. Ew. Melissa's smile tightened. "No one's asking for everything. Just a signature here and there, so we can consolidate things. It's really just for convenience." I stared at her, then at Daniel. His gaze dropped to his plate. My heart ached, but I refused to let it show. "Convenience for whom?" I asked softly. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Melissa spoke, her tone sharper. "You know, sometimes pride gets in the way of good sense. You could make life easier for all of us, including yourself." I leaned back in my chair, my expression calm though my pulse raced. "Or maybe I'd be making life easier for you. Funny how that works." The dinner ended shortly after, the warmth drained from the room. Daniel drove me home in silence. As I stepped out of the car, I glanced at him. "Son, remember one thing. Silence doesn't mean ignorance." He didn't respond, just stared at the steering wheel as if it might swallow him whole. Back inside my house, I picked up my notebook and documented every detail: the menu, their words, even Melissa's expression when I refused. I added it to the growing file I planned to hand to Mr. Harris. Days later, Melissa escalated again. This time, she cornered me at my granddaughter's school event. She leaned close, her whisper cold. "You're making things harder than they need to be. Don't you want to leave a secure future for your granddaughter?" I turned to her, keeping my face composed. "I'll make sure she's secure, but I don't recall asking for your definition of it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're going to regret this stubbornness." I walked away without another word, but inside, fire surged. She had crossed a line using my granddaughter as leverage. That was the moment I knew. Waiting and observing was no longer enough. It was time to strike back. That evening, I met with Mr. Harris again. He listened carefully as I recounted Melissa's threats. Then he tapped his pen against his notepad. "We have enough to start building a case. But I think it's better to be strategic. Let's not just defend you should go on the offensive." He explained how we could reinforce my estate plan, ensuring Melissa couldn't touch a cent without my direct approval. More than that, he suggested preparing a formal declaration to be unveiled at the right moment, in front of witnesses. The thought of it sent a surge of grim satisfaction through me. Over the next few weeks, I followed his advice to the letter. I updated my accounts, secured new passwords, and moved certain documents into a safe deposit box. Each step was like fortifying walls around a fortress. Melissa had no idea I was preparing, and that ignorance would be her undoing. Then came the breaking point. One afternoon, Daniel showed up at my door, looking exhausted. He held another folder of papers. "Mom, please. Melissa says if you just sign these, everything will calm down." I opened the door wider but didn't invite him in. "Daniel, look at me. Do you think I don't understand what's happening?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's not what you think. We're just trying to..." "To what? Take what isn't yours? Strip away the security your father and I built?" He flinched at my words, his face flushing. "I don't want this fight." "Then stop fighting me," I said firmly. "You're my son, but right now, you're letting her lead you down a path that will only bring shame." For a moment, he looked like the boy I once knew, hesitant, conflicted, lost. Then he muttered, "I should go," and left without another word. I watched him drive away, sorrow gnawing at me. But beneath the sorrow, steel was forming. Melissa thought she was clever, orchestrating her moves. Daniel thought silence would absolve him. But neither of them realized the storm I was about to unleash. I returned to my rocking chair that night, the one by the window, and held my husband's note once more. His words rang louder than ever. "You are stronger than you believe." I whispered into the quiet house. "They'll find out soon enough." And with Mr. Harris's plan taking shape, I knew the day was coming when their smug confidence would crumble in front of everyone. The morning of the so-called family meeting dawned gray and heavy, as though the sky itself sensed the storm about to erupt. Melissa had arranged it under the pretense of clearing the air. Her message to me had been deceptively cheerful. "Mom, let's all sit down together, talk things through, and make sure we're on the same page." I knew better. This wasn't about reconciliation, it was about control. I arrived at Daniel's house precisely at noon. The driveway was crowded: his car, Melissa's SUV, and two vehicles I didn't recognize. As I stepped out of my own car, I recognized the visitors. Melissa's brother and his wife, faces smug with expectation. They weren't just family, they were reinforcements, there to intimidate me. Inside, the dining table was cleared of food but piled with folders, papers, and pens. Melissa greeted me with a gleaming smile that failed to hide the glint in her eyes. "Mom, thank you for coming. We just want to make everything transparent today." Daniel stood beside her, his shoulders tense, his gaze flitting from me to the table like a guilty schoolboy. My granddaughter peeked from the hallway, but Melissa quickly ushered her away with a sharp whisper. That cut me deeply. My sweet girl wasn't allowed to witness what her parents were plotting. We sat down. Melissa immediately launched into her script. "As you know, Mom, managing finances can be complicated, especially at your age. Daniel and I have been talking with some advisors, and we've come up with a plan that will benefit everyone. If you'll just sign these authorizations, we can ensure your accounts are properly handled, your assets consolidated, and your future secure." Her brother nodded vigorously. "It's really best for you. Think of it as modernizing." I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "I see." My voice was even, betraying none of the fury bubbling inside. Melissa slid the papers toward me, her manicured nails tapping impatiently. "All it takes is your signature, Mom. One signature, and you won't have to worry anymore." I let the silence stretch. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking. "Mom, please. We're just trying to help." I lifted my gaze and met his eyes. "Are you? Or are you trying to help yourselves?" The room stiffened. Melissa's smile faltered, her eyes flashing. "That's unfair, Mom. You've always been so suspicious. We're your family. Don't you trust us?" I leaned forward slowly, placing my palms on the table. "Trust isn't something you demand, Melissa. It's something you earn, and you've done nothing but erode it." She exhaled sharply, then snapped her fingers at Daniel. "Show her the projections." He pulled out a chart, his hands trembling slightly. Numbers, percentages, and pie graphs covered the page. "See, Mom? With you signing over power of attorney, we can reduce taxes, streamline the estate, make sure everything is—" I cut him off. "Make sure everything is under your control, you mean?" The words landed like a slap. Daniel's face reddened. Melissa's eyes narrowed. Her brother muttered, "She's being difficult." I reached into my purse. Melissa's eyes lit up, expecting me to pull out a pen. Instead, I withdrew a thick envelope. Calmly, I slid it onto the table. "You want transparency? Here it is." Melissa frowned. "What's this?" I opened the envelope and spread out the documents. Notarized papers from Mr. Harris, updated estate plans, and a declaration signed and sealed by the bank. "This," I said firmly, "is my estate. Reinforced, updated, and protected. Every account, every property, every policy. Untouchable by anyone but me." Melissa's face drained of color. Her brother leaned forward, squinting at the official seals. "What is this? Who gave you these?" "I did," came a voice from the doorway. Mr. Harris himself stepped inside, briefcase in hand. I had invited him, ensuring there would be no way for Melissa to twist the story. "I'm Mrs. Grant's attorney," he announced. "And everything you see here is legally binding." The room erupted. Melissa's voice rose, sharp and frantic. "You blindsided us. How dare you bring in a lawyer without telling us?" Mr. Harris remained calm, opening his briefcase. "How dare you attempt to coerce your mother-in-law into signing away her rights? I have records, statements, and witnesses of repeated attempts at manipulation. You should consider yourselves fortunate she hasn't filed formal charges." Daniel's face pallid. "Charge?" Melissa turned on him instantly. "Don't just sit there. Do something." But Daniel only stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. He had no defense, no courage. For the first time, I saw him not as my son, but as a boy hiding behind his wife's shadow. My heart broke, but I steeled myself. Melissa slammed her palm against the table. "You can't just lock us out like this. We're family." I rose slowly to my feet. Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't teach an 8-year-old child to overhear whispered plots about taking money from her grandmother. That little girl told me the truth, and I will never forget it. Melissa froze, her mouth slightly open. Daniel's eyes darted in shock. They hadn't realized their daughter had betrayed their secret. The room fell into silence heavy enough to crush stone. Finally, Melissa hissed, "This isn't over." But Mr. Harris closed his briefcase with a snap. "Legally it is. You've lost any chance of contesting her estate." I turned to leave, my shawl draped around my shoulders. At the doorway, I paused. "I came here today to listen, but what I heard was greed. What you saw was strength. Never mistake my quiet for weakness again." I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air, my heart pounding. Behind me, muffled voices clashed: Melissa's shrill outrage, Daniel's feeble protests, her brother's angry muttering. But none of it mattered. The balance of power had shifted, and it would never tilt back in their favor. Later that evening, I sat once more in my rocking chair. My granddaughter called, her voice bright. "Grandma, are you okay?" I smiled into the receiver. "Yes, darling. Better than okay. Sometimes people forget who they're dealing with. But today," I reminded them. After we hung up, I gazed out the window, the fading sun casting long shadows across the yard. My husband's photograph on the mantel seemed to glow in the dim light. I whispered softly, "I stood my ground, just like you taught me." The battle wasn't completely over. I knew Melissa wouldn't give up so easily. But the tide had turned, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear lift from my chest. They thought they could corner me. Instead, I had cornered them. And soon enough, the entire family would see the truth. I was no pawn in their game. I was the one holding the board. The days after the confrontation were eerily quiet. Melissa didn't call, Daniel didn't stop by, and no invitations arrived. For a brief moment, I wondered if they had finally learned their lesson. But deep down, I knew Melissa wasn't one to surrender. Her pride was too sharp, her hunger too insatiable. Silence wasn't acceptance, it was plotting. Sure enough, 3 weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't handwritten. It was a formal notice, stamped and sealed from a law office I didn't recognize. The words leapt from the page: "Petition to challenge estate planning documents." Melissa had found herself a new lawyer, and now she was trying to drag me into a legal battle. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the paper while the morning light streamed across the wood. For a moment, fear threatened to take root. Courtrooms, legal fees, public scrutiny. It all seemed overwhelming. But then I remembered Mr. Harris's steady words, and my husband's shaky handwriting on that note tucked safely in my drawer. Strength surged again. I dialed Mr. Harris immediately. "They filed a petition," I told him. "I expected as much," he replied calmly. "Let them try. They don't know the depth of the protections we put in place. This is where their overconfidence becomes their undoing." The first court date arrived sooner than I anticipated. Walking into that courthouse, I felt the weight of generations of family loyalty and betrayal pressing on my shoulders. Melissa was there, dressed in a sharp navy suit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression a mask of righteous indignation. Daniel stood beside her, pale and uncomfortable, refusing to meet my eyes. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, called the session to order. Melissa's lawyer began with a flourish, painting her as a concerned daughter-in-law merely trying to safeguard an elderly woman's future. He spoke of confusion, outdated documents, and a need for younger oversight. I sat silently, my hands folded in my lap. Mr. Harris had told me to let them speak, to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And they did. Melissa's lawyer went on about family unity and shared responsibility, his words dripping with false compassion. When Melissa took the stand, Her performance was flawless. Tears glistened in her eyes as she claimed she only wanted what was best for me. But then it was our turn. Mr. Harris stood, his presence calm but commanding. He laid out every attempt Melissa had made to pressure me into signing documents. He presented my notebook, filled with dated entries, word-for-word recollections of conversations, even descriptions of body language. He introduced the bank manager's testimony, confirming Melissa had attempted unauthorized access to my accounts. Piece by piece, he dismantled the carefully constructed facade. Finally, he pulled out the trump card, an affidavit from my granddaughter's teacher, who had overheard Melissa hissing at Daniel in the school parking lot about getting control of her mother's money before it's too late. The courtroom went still. Melissa's composure cracked. "That's a lie," she burst out, her voice shrill. But the judge raised a hand, silencing her. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face crimson. For the first time, he looked at me, really looked at me with shame etched into every line of his expression. When it was my turn to speak, I rose slowly, my shawl wrapped tightly around my shoulders. My voice trembled at first, but steadied as I continued. I told the judge about my husband's careful planning, about the promises we had made to each other to protect what we built. I spoke of my love for my family, for Daniel, for my granddaughter, and how painful it was to realize that trust had been broken. "I am not confused," I said firmly, looking straight at Melissa. "I am not weak, and I am not signing my life away to satisfy anyone's greed. My silence has been mistaken for frailty. But silence, Your Honor, is not weakness. It is patience. And I have been patient long enough." The judge regarded me thoughtfully, then glanced at Melissa, who was visibly unraveling. Her lawyer shuffled his papers, his confidence evaporating. When the session ended, Mr. Harris leaned toward me. "We've won this round. But be ready, she may try again. Pride like hers doesn't die easily." I nodded, my eyes on Melissa as she stormed out of the courtroom, Daniel trailing behind her like a defeated shadow. Outside, the crisp air filled my lungs. The courthouse steps felt like a stage, and I knew others were watching, whispering. But I didn't care. I had walked into that room alone, armed with nothing but truth and preparation, and I had walked out stronger. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned irrevocably in my favor. Melissa had tried to cast me as the helpless grandmother. Instead, I had shown the world and my family that I was a fighter. And this was only the beginning of my counterattack. The weeks that followed the first court hearing were a whirlwind of whispers, phone calls, and unexpected visits. Word of the courtroom drama had spread quickly among extended family and neighbors. In small towns, secrets don't stay buried for long, and Melissa's attempt to wrestle control from me had become the talk of every coffee shop and church pew. I knew this stung her more than the judge's reprimand. Her reputation was her pride, and now it was unraveling. But Melissa wasn't finished. A bruised ego can be more dangerous than an untested scheme. Late one evening, I received a voicemail from Daniel. His voice was low, almost broken. "Mom, Melissa's furious. She says you've humiliated her. She wants to fight harder, even if it destroys us. I don't know what to do anymore." I listened to it twice, my heart heavy. My son sounded like a man trapped in a cage he had willingly stepped into. I pitied him, but pity didn't erase betrayal. A week later, the second court session commenced. This time, Melissa arrived with boxes of evidence stacked high. Her lawyer looked more determined, though less polished than before. They claimed I had been manipulated by Mr. Harris, that I was too frail to manage complex affairs. Melissa even produced a doctor's note conveniently from a physician friend, suggesting I might be experiencing memory decline. I almost laughed at the absurdity. They had gone from painting themselves as my protectors to portraying me as incompetent. But this overreach was exactly what Mr. Harris had anticipated. When it was our turn, he called witnesses. The bank manager testified firmly that I handled every transaction with clarity. My neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, recounted how she saw Melissa repeatedly arrive at my house with documents, always leaving with frustration when I refused to sign. Even the grocery clerk described how I meticulously checked every receipt, proving my sharpness and independence. But the most damning blow came when Mr. Harris introduced a recording. It was scratchy but clear enough. Melissa's voice, sharp and impatient, saying to Daniel, If she doesn't sign soon, we'll lose everything. You have to push her harder." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Melissa's face went pale, then blotchy red. Daniel's head dropped into his hands. The judge leaned forward, her expression icy. "Mrs. Grant, do you deny this is your voice?" Melissa stammered, searching for words, but none came. Her lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a firm gavel. In that moment, the illusion shattered completely. Melissa wasn't the concerned daughter-in-law or the misunderstood wife. She was exposed for what she truly was, a manipulator, driven by greed. The judge's ruling was swift. My estate plan remained untouched, reinforced even further by court decree. Melissa was warned against future harassment, with the threat of legal penalties should she continue her schemes. When the session ended, Melissa stormed out of the courtroom, her heels striking the floor like hammers. Daniel lingered, his shoulders slumped. For a long moment, he looked at me, shame and sorrow battling in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered. I wanted to reach for him, to embrace the boy I once cradled in my arms. But I didn't. Some wounds don't heal with a single apology. I simply nodded and walked away, my shawl brushing against my sides like armor. Outside, the sun was shining, warm and steady. Mr. Harris walked beside me, his expression triumphant. "It's over," he said. "They can't touch you now." I exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't just about winning a case. It was about reclaiming dignity, about reminding myself and everyone else that I wasn't a woman to be underestimated. When I returned home, my granddaughter was waiting on the porch, her little face lighting up as she ran into my arms. "Grandma, Daddy said you were so brave." I held her tightly, tears pricking my eyes. "No, sweetheart. I was just honest. Sometimes honesty is the bravest thing you can give." That night, as I sat in my rocking chair, I looked at my husband's photograph once more. I whispered, "We did it. They tried to take everything, but I stood my ground, just like you told me to." The war Melissa started had backfired. She had tried to strip me of my power, but instead, I had stripped away her mask. And though my family might never be the same, I knew one truth would endure. They would never again mistake my silence for weakness. The fight was over, but the lesson for them, and for me, would last a lifetime. The following weeks felt like breathing clean air after years of suffocation. The house was quiet. The phone stopped buzzing with demands, and for once, I could sip my morning coffee without bracing for another confrontation. Melissa had vanished from my doorstep, from my mailbox, from my life. The courtroom defeat had burned her pride to ashes, and she knew better than to fan the flames again. But the absence of noise didn't mean the absence of thought. Some nights I sat awake, staring at the ceiling, asking myself how my family had come to this point. How had the son I once cradled, the boy who used to climb into my lap with sticky fingers and a toothy grin, grown into a man so easily swayed? It wasn't Melissa alone, it was his weakness that let her thrive. That truth hurt more than any petition or threat. One Saturday afternoon, Daniel came to visit. He stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, his eyes ringed with shadows. For a moment, I considered not opening the door, but something inside me, perhaps the ghost of the boy he used to be, pushed me to turn the knob. "Mom," he said softly, "I don't know how to fix this." I studied him, my silence stretching long enough to make him squirm. Finally, I spoke. "You start by admitting you let it happen. You start by standing up, even when it's hard. That's what being a man means." His eyes glistened, but he nodded. We didn't hug, we didn't cry. The gap between us couldn't be mended in one afternoon. But maybe, just maybe, it was the first crack of light through a long closed door. My granddaughter remained my anchor. She visited often, her laughter filling the house, her innocent chatter washing away the bitterness. One evening, as we baked cookies together, she looked up at me with wide eyes. "Grandma, are you glad I told you the secret?" I knelt beside her, brushing flour from her cheek. "Sweetheart, you saved me. You reminded me that truth always finds its way out, even from the smallest voice." Her smile widened, and in that moment, I knew the cycle had broken. She had seen what greed could do, and she had seen the strength it took to stand against it. That lesson would stay with her far longer than the cookies we baked. At church the next Sunday, neighbors approached me quietly. Some offered words of encouragement. Others whispered about Melissa's downfall. I didn't revel in their gossip. Revenge wasn't about spectacle, it was about reclaiming what was stolen. Dignity, peace, justice. When I returned home, I paused at the mantel where my husband's photo sat. His eyes, forever frozen in kindness, seemed to meet mine. I kept your promise, I whispered. They didn't take a dime, and they never will. I sank into my rocking chair, the same spot where so many tears and plans had been born, and exhaled. The war was over, not with shouts or chaos, but with silence. My silence. The very thing they mistook for weakness had been my shield, my sword, and my victory. As I gazed out the window, the evening sun painting the sky in strokes of gold and crimson, I thought of everyone who might hear my story. Perhaps they too had been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed. Perhaps they too sat in quiet rooms, wondering if their voice still mattered. To them, I would say this: never confuse stillness with surrender. Never let others decide your worth. Silence can be powerful when paired with resolve, and when the time is right, speak or act in a way that no one can ignore. I shocked them all. Not with rage, not with force, but with the quiet certainty that I would not be moved. And that, in the end, is the sweetest revenge of all. So I ask you, listening to my story now, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or silenced? Share your thoughts below. Let the world know that silence is not weakness. And if my story has struck a chord in your heart, don't forget to subscribe. Because sometimes, the sweetest victories are the ones no one sees coming until they do.